Hey, I'm Assia Boundaoui. I am based between Chicago and Southern California, currently in Chicago. And yeah, I'm a filmmaker and part of a number of small collectives, but excited to talk with you guys. I was at your Sundance event at the Firelight House this year, which was really inspiring. So it was wonderful to see you guys from a distance in action, and really excited to meet you guys personally and have a conversation with you about what we're hoping to brew. Violeta, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Violeta Ayala. I'm a filmmaker. Currently, I am in Sydney, Australia. I'm Quechua. I'm from Bolivia. I'm usually spend 6 months a year in Cochabamba, where I'm from, in the middle of the Andes. But this time is an unusual time, as we all know. I'm just waking up, so my brain is gonna take a little bit of time. Thank you all for joining us. I've been making films for the past 15 years, I think. My pronoun is we. I think that for me it's very difficult to understand the world as I, because of the culture that I come from. And I feel always that I'm living in many different worlds. And I think that because where I come from, I grew up in Bolivia. I live quite a bit of time in Chicago. I lived in New York. I live in Paris, and my father was politically exiled to Australia, so I have an Australian passport. And I think what is important for me is that maybe I'm seeing a little bit into the future because I'm in Australia, and things didn't go bad here, but we coming out of this, and I see racism growing exponentially like I never seen before and I never experienced before. And I think that's something that we need to think about it a lot, about what we're going to do, because as I said, I'm seeing this maybe a little bit into the future. And racism is something that it's really scary to me. So I think that it's important to start thinking what will happen then. Maybe Sabaah?
Sabaah just texted me, can you guys hear me?
No.
So maybe she is...
Sabaah, can you talk right now? You were muted. I just unmuted you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I've been over here talking to myself the whole time. Hi, everybody. My name is Sabaah Folayan. What brings me to this call is having witnessed the incident that you heard about at Sundance, but also just being a part of this industry and having these conversations over and over at each space where, they're not meeting our needs as far as safety while they're simultaneously really invested in the image of being allies. So this whole initiative is about trying to be really creative and strategic about using the actual leverage that we have to get some force behind these principles that everyone is talking about. I'm super excited about that. I'm super honored to be working with Assia and Violeta, who we kind of just organically, in the moment, like we just knew that we had to respond, and it kept building. And then obviously Sonya, who has been a mentor and example from the beginning. This just feels like a really powerful moment, us coming together and even having these conversations outside of, or at least for me, outside of my normal silos. So I'm excited to meet everyone, those of you that I haven't met from the Undocumented Collective. And I look forward to continuing to build either through the community board or just, I hope that generally we can have these lines of communication be open, because I see that the same thing, and I think we all see that the same thing is happening to all of us in different silos, and there's that power that we have when we come together as communities. So happy to be sharing space with you all. Okay, wait, are you there?
Yeah, we're there. Sorry, it's awkward Zoom silence. Sonia's about to talk.
Oh, okay. I was waiting to be invited. I was like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's
I'm
fine.
not used to talking on this call.
I'm usually used to barging in, so I'll just. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonya, she, her. I'm based here, also in Los Angeles, Tombaland. I've met most of you from the Undocumented Filmmaker Collective. Set and Rahi, we talk every 3 hours, I think. But Dorian and Marcos, it's great to see your faces as well and connect. So my entry point here is, I left Firelight, where I've been for about 14 years, a couple of months ago, and I started this 2-year fellowship in February, and the fellowship is pretty broad and kind of gives me free reign to advance certain ideas or work on projects. And a lot of what I'm going to be, what I had planned to work on was elevating best practices within the documentary field that position accountability, ethics, and equality and equity, and advance those practices wherever they're found across the field, whether it's in production, curation, impact production, and create new writing, new research, new convenings and programming to support best practices around that. So basically it's culture shift work I'm trying to do over the next 2 years. And some of that culture shift finds me in working groups of various working groups of different folks, mostly collectives of color, different constellations of groups of folks of color who are advancing this kind of equity work, this culture shift within this messed up field that we have all found ourselves in, working within an art form that has its roots in racist colonial ethnography, and we're all trying to make these shifts. We're doing them oftentimes in silos. Sometimes folks are doing them with full-time jobs. Sometimes folks are doing them and trying to eke out a living. And I'm trying to support all of that work, and I'd like to see some coordination around that work. And I don't think all of that work needs to have a name and a face, but I think it needs coordination. Meaning, I don't think all of the coordination needs to be public. I think some things are more effective behind the scenes, but I think some things are more effective out loud, and they're really advocacy leaning. And so I would like to see, I have some time over the next couple of years to devote to this culture shift work and supporting the networks that are doing this and helping to bring some of this work in greater formation. So Assia, Sabaah, and Violeta reached out to me to see how I could possibly be helpful. And so I'm also kind of here to listen and to see how I can be useful to kind of move this work forward.
Thank you, Sonya. I am curious, just because I have to hop off, whether someone from you all's team, Assia, would be open to facilitating to kind of guide us to what you'd like to talk about. And also just to share, like in the email that I mentioned, just for transparency's sake, last week or a couple of Fridays ago, Heinel from Sundance reached out to us, inviting us to submit a proposal for this emergency grant to different organizations they were sharing. And we just want to be mindful that, you all are sharing, your experiences with them also. And we want to make sure that we're mindful of this conversation and how we navigate, things like this and how we can be best in solidarity with folks. Oh, I see Ame also just joined from our team. Before we segue into anything, can we have Ame introduce himself?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, of course, my bad for kind of coming in late. My name's Ame. My pronouns are he, his, him. From Carson, California. And I am a filmmaker, or striving to be a filmmaker.
Would you mind sharing also, Ame, what you do in the collective?
I'm part of the community organizing subcommittee, and our subcommittee is mostly dedicated. Our mission is mostly just focused on community outreach and make sure that we are giving our opportunity, like these resources and opportunities to like community members and our members as well.
Thank you, Ame. Passing it on to you, Assia.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, I'm happy to facilitate. So I can just give you guys all a little bit of background. You know, we included some of this in the email to Seth, but the idea for what we were trying to build here, and Violeta and Sabaah, feel free to jump in at any point. So basically, as a result of this assault and harassment that we got from a private security guard at Sundance, we were able to negotiate some demands from Sundance in our accountability process that we went through with them. And one of the things that came out of it was we said, like, what happened to us was not a unique incident, and that there's a culture, you know, of unwelcomeness at best, but that, you know, and like violence at worst for people of color that come to the Sundance Film Festival. And, you know, the onus is on you to investigate the experience of people of color at your festival and to issue a public-facing report about it, and to look deeply at the structures of inequity that have caused this to happen. And they agreed to that. And so what we want is, basically, we don't want this to be a superficial report. We want it to be independent. We don't want it to be something that they internally do and is kind of just a surface solution. So one of our ways that we wanted to try to make sure that something robust comes out of this was to have a community board oversee that entire process of the investigation into the experiences and into the report and the recommendations that come out of it. That there would be a third-party contractor that does this investigation, and that there would be a community board that oversees that whole process, and as part of writing the report in a way. So, and we also thought that obviously what happens at Sundance is happening at other film festivals around the country. You know, like what Sabaah said, like they, you know, they want this visibility of people of color at their festival, but there are no conditions in the actual soil to actually make that not only safe, but generative for us. And harm continues to happen in those spaces when that's the setup, right? And so we were hoping that this report would be the beginning of an industry-wide standard for how festivals can address the problem of inequity, and have, like, you know, recommendations that actually also come with some teeth, you know, and the way we do that is through the foundations, you know, that their funding ought to be connected somehow with whether they actually follow the recommendations or not. So what does enforcement look like? We're thinking deeply about those things. And so that's kind of the origin of what we want. The other part of the demands was to create a physical safe space for people of color at the festival. We don't know if they're going to be physical festivals anytime in the next 12 months, Violeta. So we will see. But that's part of what we, you know, got them to agree to. So whenever that happens again, that's something that we hope the community board will also build out. So beyond the specificity of the Sundance Film Festival, and I hope, Sonya, maybe you can speak to this. Sonya, and we've also been talking about what beyond just the film festivals, inequity in the field, like culture-wide, the culture basically in our industry, and what does it take to change that? And there have been numerous conversations and initiatives that are happening formally and informally among folks like us. And the idea is to have a connectivity, you know, to connect those nodes and to have like something overall that this community board can serve as a connector for these different initiatives and these different, you know, the important equity work basically that people are talking about and that have been building out. so that this community board would not just be stuck on the film festivals, but it would be addressing some, industry-wide culture shift work. But I'm going to pass it to you, Sonya, if you want to elaborate a little on that.
I mean, I would just add that, I would just add that I think the work that's happening in silos, it's, Brown Girls is doing, I mean, everyone's attacking this lack of equity and the culture that, there are so many programs that have been created in the last 10 years to recruit folks of color into the documentary film industry, tons of artistic pipeline programs. And I think there's been some success in that over the last decade. So if we address recruitment and representation of folks of color in the industry, then there's these other pieces, which is retention, right? And then there's sustainability. Sustainability is a problem across the board, no matter what your hue and your background, unless you're just, independently wealthy. But sustainability hits folks of color harder. Retention is an issue that has to do with both the lack of economic sustainability of this work and the fact that there is a culture that's pervasive in this work. Has to do with the form and the history of the form that's never been addressed, really, and it also has to do with the gatekeepers and the culture and the culture is also what pushes folks of color out. So even though we're like the industry feels like it's addressing a pipeline, it's not addressing the culture or the structures that push those folks out that they put all this money into bringing in. And so the onus has been on folks of color for us to do our own organizing to either respond to messed up stuff that happens at events, at conferences, at festivals, and meetings, and whatever. And we're doing all that work in silos, and everyone's doing it on top of their art, or on top of their full-time job, and on top of everything else. And there's no organized effort to address the culture and the structures that are pushing folks of color out of this field. So what I'm interested in is thinking about both, what are the structures? What are the groups that are mapping out the groups that are working on culture shift efforts, in small collectives or in organized groups, and trying to intervene, like mapping that landscape out, then bringing representatives from each of these groups that are trying to work on this to start to think about what are our collective goals and what are our collective strategies that we can all support. What are people's appetites and capacity to work on specific issues? And then can we have a representative board of folks from different working groups, from different communities that can respond to issues as they arise in the field? So when we think about the incident that happened at Sundance, we can think about so many flashpoint incidents that have happened over the last couple of years, that if we had a body that could respond, whether it's behind the scenes work or public facing critique, naming and shaming, whatever it is, that there's a body that can make some decisions on how we can respond and push some work forward collectively. So that's what I'm interested in. I think this is an important moment. It's in a moment because there's been so much work that's starting to coalesce. It's also a moment because the industry is on its heels right now. The industry it's been knocked down. Sundance is preparing for a virtual festival next year. All the winter festivals are considering virtual festivals, and that could go well into past spring of next year. So everybody, the distribution model's broken, like it's all breaking down, which is an opportunity to reshape something new, and to not just level critique, but to level a process and a model for institutional accountability, which this Sundance piece is a real model for the field, for other institutions. This is how you hold yourselves, and this is how you will be held accountable as an institution. Here's a model. Sundance just went through it, and now Tribeca, whomever, Fulano, you can look at this model. And then there needs to be a model for individual accountability too. So anyway, I just think that there's this work that could come out of this that could be that if we're holding hands with each other through this process, the work can go much further.
Yeah. I'm a troublemaker. I think the only way that you can change things is by holding people responsible. For me, individual doesn't mean much anymore because I've been there and I've done that. And so many people, so many filmmakers of color came here and gone. They come, and they go. But it's not only us, the filmmakers, that come and go. It's also people of color within institutions that they don't have any power. They're there because they, as Sabaah said, they're trying to show that they are diverse, but it doesn't mean anything, because diversity also means accepting different ways of thinking, cultures, different ways of seeing the world. That's what enriches us. And also, the colonizing cinema means that each of us has a way to see the world. And all right, white people are the ones who are set what cinema looks like, how a documentary should be, and the way that we should see these things. But we are not, we are, for me, it's very important that we reimagine what our own voices can say, our own cinema can develop. And for me, it's so important that we hold hands with each other to bring accountability. The process with Sundance was difficult, was scary at times, because we were going against an institution. Like, I'm talking about, it was so scary that at some point we even thought about our own careers, what will happen here, because we said the only thing we wanted you to do is that you have this set of reference. I don't remember what it was, but they have this thing that they say that you have to behave.
Code of conduct.
Code of conduct. We ask them to only do what the code of conduct says, and this wasn't done. So I always feel like people want potatoes, but they always keep putting water to oranges or apples, and then say, we want potatoes. As an institution, we want potatoes. Yeah, all right, if you want potatoes, why you keep putting water to oranges or apples? You're gonna get oranges or apples if you want potatoes. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So what is important, I think, that we dare to imagine what we want to see. And also, we held all of these institutions accountable, and we want them to tell us how many people of color they funding. Are they funding always the same people of color? Where these people are coming from? How many? What if that's even to get to that point? But also, not just from the outside, but also support our friends who are inside these organizations, because often it's so tough for them, maybe even tougher to be in the inside than being in the outside. As an outsider, we can claim, we can complain, we can critique, we can fight. As an insider, that's even harder. So I think that's something that we need to, when I say, I don't think unity is the word, because unity means we all the same and we're not. But I think solidarity amongst each other. I think solidarity to see that we can reimagine what the future or the present can look like. That we cannot let them go back to normal, because normal was a big problem for us. It's not fair. Like, for 15 years, I've been going to festivals. All my films premiere at Toronto, Berlin, I've been Sundance, everywhere. And it's always this feeling at the end, like, what I'm doing here? I'm not even welcome. Are they using me? Like, I don't want that anymore. I don't want that for anyone anymore. So that's why I said that I think that for me, the only way we can break this system is by fighting against it. I'm not in a like stupid, like, but that's why I say I'm a troublemaker, because I can make trouble. But we cannot expect everyone to do the same, but we need to support each other and act in solidarity. And we don't want them to say, oh, we're going to favor one group over the other. This is not what is this about, because that's not going to work. Has already failed. We want all of us to be able to look after each other.
Sabaah, is there anything you want to add before we open things up to hear from the undocumented collective folks?
No, I think everything that was shared was really well said, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about the work that Undocumented Collective is doing. And, I know folks have to jump off relatively soon, but to just start to get a sense of if there's resonance being felt on behalf of you guys over there.
Yeah, and also, like, in terms of like the equity, and the culture stuff that you guys are thinking about and organizing around, like, you know, what resonates or what are your concerns that we haven't like brought up.
And I would also add one more question, because I appreciate the transparency that in you guys sharing that you're getting funding, or invited to apply for funding from Sundance. And one of the things that Sonya brought up early, which I think is really important, is that we recognize that we rely on these relationships to the same institutions that we're trying to hold accountable. And I'm curious, not to ask you to share anything definitive, but I'm curious, what comes to mind as far as navigating those relationships, or do you have those experiences in the past as far as, that conflict that you can feel when you're trying to stand by your principles and then needing to work with an institution? So yeah, I would just invite folks at the Undocumented Collective if anyone wants to share.
I have a few thoughts to share, but I just wanted to see if anyone else wanted to chime in before I shared my thoughts from our collective. I know maybe a couple of folks have to jump off sooner than I do. Okay, yeah, I can share. I have a bunch of thoughts, but I can share maybe first a little bit about the collective and that's relevant to the conversation here. I guess one of the things that in terms of like how we are structuring ourselves, I think we're just, to me, the different like collectives of color that exist out there, collective or like organizations of color that exist out there, I think in terms of the general structure of the group is a little unique to begin with, because we are trying to, from the beginning, and the intention was to have a very horizontal structure. And a lot of the folks have an community organizing background that are in the collective. And I think, and specifically organizing around immigration and with undocumented communities and such. And everyone is pretty much have like a pretty long, like at least, yeah, like it's a makeup of like, all of us are emerging, but a long history of a lot of work that people have been in the field in various ways as freelancers, editors, cinematographers, playing different roles. And I think we all were kind of bring a lot of shared values, brought shared values to the collective in terms of personal experiences of being excluded from all types of resources based on citizenship status. And so, in terms of, I feel like most of the folks bring this mindfulness around how can we continuously, how can we not reinforce the things that is, the reason that's causing these exclusions, exclusionary practices, colonial behaviors in the field and such. And so one is like the operational structure has been something that we're constantly hoping that we can be a model for how, as an organization we operate. That's one piece of it. In terms of relationship with, gatekeepers, we are kind of, I would say, still in the beginning stages of it in terms of building relationships. The collective kind of started from Getting Real 2 years ago, but we like kind of full on started to like make like, I guess, relationships with partners with specific asks in the last like year or so. And one thing I would say is that we are in whatever our ask is, we're asking that we maintain our autonomy. So if we're going to a panel for all the festivals, that we were supposed to do a national tour in 2020, we're asking the festivals that we get to curate the content, we get to curate who's going to be on the panel, who's going to be the moderator, and have autonomy over that. With funders also, because we're applying for an organizational grant, we are also asking autonomy over that and having unrestricted funds as much as possible. So that's one way that I feel like, I guess, our collective is like, I guess, resisting against, like, you know, falling under the trap of like, oh, you're giving us money, or like, you know, that we have to play by your rule. And maybe the other, and just to maybe briefly talk a little bit about what the collective has been doing. So we are 30 members, and we have 5 different subcommittees: community organizing, film festival, funding and grants, mentorship, and PR and visibility. But kind of mentorship and PR and visibility, I think, are combined right now, and we're hoping to also like an ad hoc subcommittee of production. And so under the collective umbrella, we're kind of hoping to do advocacy, our main work. So also, just a news, we just got fiscally sponsored by Allard Media Project, which was super exciting. Once we, thank you. We are in conversation with MacArthur, Ford Foundation, and Perspective to hopefully secure some funding to get our members paid for the to the sustainability of the work that we want to do. And the main pillars of our work, we're hoping, we have been like kind of just having this like series of oral history, or like, I don't know, I guess it felt sort of like an oral history series or something. We're talking to all the organizations of color leaders to learn from them how they started out, what their process have been like, what they learned, what their mistakes were, what their challenges were, and things like that. And from all of that, we are hoping to actually become a nonprofit, which I don't know the good and bad of it, but that which will be kind of the arm that does the advocacy work for very similar things we're talking about here. So we have been in conversation, kind of consistently about that. What are all those things that we want to advocate for? And how can we also be in solidarity with all the other, like just under the BIPOC filmmakers, with the BIPOC filmmakers community. And then we're hoping that maybe as a long-term goal to have a production company umbrella where we can create our own work and have like a source of income that also helps sustain the collective going. I'll pause for a second and see if anyone else from the collective wants to chime in and add anything to it. And then I have a couple more thoughts to share along the lines of, so I also work at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University and coordinate the continuing education program in documentary arts. And a few thoughts came up for me around like education and like, folks who are getting MFAs in documentary and who are like all these people who are like emerging filmmakers that are coming out of film schools, and how the education sector is looking like. And I've been at CES for almost 6 years now, and there's been some shift and some work that's been happening. And yeah, I could share a little bit more about that, but I'll pause for a second.
Yes, something to add, I think that came to my mind was, I think it was, something was brought up where it's like, why am I going to these film festivals if these people don't, like, I want to, like, I think from my experiences and a couple of experiences in the UFC, the field. When a couple people went to Sundance and they had the opportunity to go to Sundance, I think one of the experiences that I think I shared and a couple people shared was like, oh, but it, like, you know, if I went alone, like I would feel very intimidated, scared, and not knowing like, you know, where to go, who to talk to, and kind of having that like imposter syndrome to like not go to these like spaces and occupy these spaces. But since we came as like a collective like group and we just kind of like mobbed in there and kind of just occupied this space, I think it gave a lot of people like just the confidence, as well as the reassurance to kind of be like, no, like, yeah, like these institutions are like pretty like messed up, and they kind of like, a lot of it always has to come from like us, and whenever that collaboration tries to happen, it's always like an scapegoat or like a commodity to these institutions. And I think it's just like forming relationships with orgs that kind of have the same values that, you know, other people have, like that come from different backgrounds of like community organizing, activism and advocacy, especially in the film world, I guess, like, or in the art world. I feel like there's not really that collective advocacy. There's always, I guess, those talks of like self-advocacy, at least from my experience, from like talking with folk, where it's like, it's always like, oh, like, you know, you should go there, but it's like, nah, like instead of like, you know, you should go there, like we should go there, like, you know, all of us should be there and, you know, occupying that space, everything. I don't know, that was something that came into my mind, that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, I really appreciate that reflection, actually. And one of the things that I don't think I mentioned or we mentioned before, but that I really hope that this group can serve as a home base to filmmakers who, you know, maybe haven't grouped up into their collective or anything yet, because I know that, you know, you meet people every now and then when you're at Sundance or at these festivals who don't have anybody that they're with, or don't have a firelight, or whatever the case may be. And I really hope that this community board or whatever we form can, and the safe space physically at Sundance or, you know, whenever, if ever that happens, can be something that does a lot of what you're talking about. I just really appreciate the spirit of that comment, because I think that part is the crucial part. Like, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for us being able to look at each other and be like, oh no, y'all, that wasn't cool. Like, we have to say something.
Yeah, we talked a lot about like that. So much of the reason, like a lot of people, like shit happens to people at festivals and nobody ever hears about it. Nobody speaks out, because you don't even know where to go with it. You don't know what the repercussions are. And it's only when you have other people with you that you're like, you know, no, that was fucked up. I am going to say something, you know, and like, what if that, you know, what does that look like magnified, you know?
Yeah, I just think that it was interesting because, as I say, now I'm in Sydney. And I had a very bad experience last week. I gave a call to a funding body to ask a question, and they really said that I shouldn't apply because only people who have produced before, just based on my accent. So after that call, I thought, what I do now, because I'm here very alone. So I actually, we write a letter to the boss of the person of this public funding body. And then she's like, when she realized who I was, she pretended she couldn't listen, but she already told me everything. Anyway, in the end, we arranged a meeting with her, but her boss, her supervisor there. So from the experience that we had at Sundance, I already learned that there are always ways to complain. And then, so we call a meeting with the person who was racist, this officer, who's very famous for being mean, plus her boss. And in the end, from that phone call, herself showed herself to everybody else it wasn't a Zoom meeting. In that Zoom meeting, she showed that she was a racist, like all the things that she said. And then in the end, we achieved that they're gonna come to my house to talk to all filmmakers of color now in Sydney, like who wanted to pitch their projects. And they're gonna, actually, the organization, Screenings at Wells is called, it's like a local funding body, will come to my house to talk about it. Because and I felt like it was just this little power of speaking out that I learned from also what we did with Sundance, because in a way we won a little bit, in a way that we achieved what we wanted to achieve, this little accountability at the beginning. And this for me was so important to show, okay, it's not okay, I don't have to cry. I just need to follow the institutional rules and do what they say to do, and do a real complaint, like Sabaah did, that they did a complaint, as they say, and ask what. And I think that's so important. It's a little thing, but it's so important for all of us that we can speak out and we can change things. And if we had a group here, I thought, wow, what we can do. If I myself am doing this is what the power of this for me. The power of, like, you're not gonna be punished for speaking out.
Yeah.
We're gonna change things by speaking out.
I also think it's just, I appreciate that, Violeta. And I'm also just thinking, I think what I was trying to flag in that early conversation was that the stakes are different for each of us depending on where we sit. Whether you're a freelance filmmaker and you speak out, the stakes are different from someone who is the only, one of a handful of staffers at Sundance or at POV or at Tribeca, who's leveling a critique of the industry or of their own institution. Or who's trying to be that force for change, but also, but is in a tough position. And the stakes also different for POC-led entities like Brown Girls, like Firelight, like you guys now, who are positioning yourself to push for access into the industry, and at the same time, having to hold those institutions accountable. So, there's a balance that I think we all, I just want to acknowledge, I understand that everybody's positionality changes the level of stakes, but that collectively there's some cover when we speak in unison on some issues. And I know that everyone is not going to be able to speak in unison on all issues, but I think what I'm hoping to see is that there is a body that cuts across these entities that provides cover for the folks within the entities, so that this is not personalized and that retribution doesn't come to the most vulnerable in the group. Because that's real, and people are, folks are, this is everyone's livelihood. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that. I know, going back to this question of how you all are starting to position yourself as a fairly new collective that's heading into nonprofit status, possibly, that's going to these funders. The other bit I think that's important to note is that within the three funders that are supporting undocumented filmmaker collective, they're also interested in supporting this work. It's basically the same program officers, and it's basically program officers of color within white foundations who are like the Black person at POV and the Latino person. Everybody is, it's like it's the same little group. We all know who we are, and everybody's trying to push from their positionality, and everyone's stakes are very different, and everyone's trying to navigate keeping a job and pushing the way they can. So I just want to say that, the Chiwe's, the Kathy Ims, and Lauren, the Danae now at Perspective, these folks are, at least what I'm hearing, because I'm sitting within a foundation, not a grant maker, but I hear, they're trying to be allies as well. And there's some things that they can say publicly and some things that they can't say publicly, they can say privately to us, but they're trying to push within those institutions that have the same kind of history that film does. And hopefully we can use that. And they want us to use that. They want us to push and do stuff that they, I think we're going to be providing cover for each other at various points throughout this process.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up the value of the reimagination part of it, and trying to keep thinking about expanding that space of, because I feel like, the pushing and resisting work is so exhausting, and it is so difficult to do on your own. So obviously this collective, and Sonya is part of a lot of the similar efforts that I'm part of too. And, I think if there is a way to build coalition that will, and if we can sustain it and manage it, that will, I think, it will nurture us to continue this work. But I also working at Duke, I feel like I can relate to the other people who are working as one of the very few staff of color constantly pushing against is just so exhausting. But like one of the reasons that we're even doing this film festival is, you know, before we were forming as a collective, we were just having this like feeling session, kind of just community building session where we just come together and just like really just hang out and just build community, right? And we a lot of times would come to the conclusion that the only answer is when we can have things by us, for us, right? The audience is our people, we are creating ours. So like the festival is kind of like that small like trial as to like, okay, like, you know, we don't want to have this accepting approval rejection process even for the festival, right? How can we even like structure the festival in a way that everyone can show at least one film, right? If it's like a 3-day long, you know, like, and so like right after this, we're jumping on the call to figure out, reimagine, like, why does it have to be in the way that festivals, you know, like completely let's break that structure, right? We sent out a survey to think about the festival name. And, you know, a lot of the brainstorming process was like, yeah, but, you know, generally the Laurel or like, you know, how Sundance has, it's like the Sundance branding is like that, or this festival branding is like that. But then we were like, no, let's think about like how do we unlearn, right? Where is that space, the sustainable space where we can unlearn what's there and reimagining, because that needs a lot of mental space, right? To like, just like space around you that we're not thinking about that and just think about something fresh, new. So anyways, and I think some of that happened at LA Media Conference last year. I think Lagaya had offered a track called Magic as Resistance, which was like more about like healing in the BIPOC media makers community, right? And I think that was just a beautiful like effort. This time we had with some other folks, there was this idea of having a BIPOC media makers network gathering called Reimagining Documentary. And I think the value of that space and more of those spaces are really important, and how can you continue to create more of that? And the collective, so I would share that in the collective, we have a Slack channel called Radical Imagination, and we're trying to just, you know, have that space. And one other quick thing that like whenever I talk to Bhavin, I feel like he keeps from Next Doc, he makes me keep thinking about this, about the pipeline, right? Who are on this side of the pipeline, the emerging young filmmakers that are coming in, like fellows of Next Doc. And you know, the program that I run, it's a continuing ed program, and you know, these are folks that don't I mean, historically this program has been a white program, and like mostly the students have been like retired old white people, but there has also been like folks of color, they can't afford to have an MFA, right? Can't afford to go to film school. So take like $200, $300 courses and do YouTube, you know, just like self-taught filmmakers. But what culture are they coming, what is their idea of documentary culture as they're coming into the field, right? I do think that if we shift the culture of the field, even whoever you are, when you're coming into the field with like fucked up problematic values, hopefully the field can hold you accountable. But simultaneously, I think if we can kind of backtrack and think about like programs like Next Doc and other programs like that, and like, so in our program, we have been like, you know, doing a lot of work to like shift the curriculum, diversify the instructor, diversify our classrooms, bring in like, you know, decolonized lens in all of the educational aspect of it, but it's not enough. So I just kind of wanted to share that.
Rahi, are you saying rather than to continue reforming the film programs at universities, to shift the thinking into other pipelines through POC organizations? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think, well,
besides the fact that reforming any of these entities is exhausting as hell.
right. I think like one piece of it is that the work in the field needs to happen, but then people who are coming into the field, right? That work needs to happen. And within that work, I mean, yeah, the same concept, right? Like reform whatever you can, but continue thinking about like programs like Next Doc, like other programs that's bringing youth filmmakers into like the beginning of the pipeline, basically, and changing that. And you know, like I was just looking at Duke just had their MFA documentary MFA graduation yesterday, and Duke Arts started posting all these, you know, the work that these MFA fellows have done. And there's, I don't know, there's just like still, you know, they're just like branding and like broadcasting a lot of problematic stuff. And then like a white filmmaker is teaching like a whole summer course on history of photography. And I'm just not sure that that person is like, you know, is, yeah. So I mean, there has been like some efforts within Duke, like Lagaya is one of the instructors. I actually just connected Bauman with two of my colleagues at CDS. So we're like bringing in folks to see how things can be changed, but I don't know. Yeah, I think I haven't thought much deeply about the education piece of it and how that ties into this work, but I think now as I'm thinking out loud, I'm thinking finding more clarity in that connection.
Because filmmaking so far is based on competition. The current structure model is based on competition. It's not based on solidarity. It's not based on retail. Like, because everything that, like, I always think about, the first time I see myself on film was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I was the Oompa Loompa. You know, that's who I was. And so I've been framed by white gaze all my life, even while I was in Bolivia. It's interesting, if a white person goes to Bolivia with a camera and you put in front of anyone, they're going to start crying. They just cry because they think that that's what you expect them to do, and that's how they seen on TV, in the Andes, in the mountains, with the llamas crying. And honestly, I have to tell people, don't cry, please, you know, like, and I say in Quechua, and then they stop, and then we can start having more honest conversations. So when we talk about changing, like, even the ones who select the films that are going to be in festivals are often white people, like, and the same people, like, not even younger white people. We're talking about the same programmers that have been holding this power forever. So I'm very interested in what you said about reimagine something that could be, doesn't really need to be based on competition, you know, because it is, that's the core of it. What do you think, Assia?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a moment, like we were talking about this and organizing, and then the pandemic happened right in the middle of us, like trying to hold Sundance accountable. And I think we're like, oh, fuck, like there's something so much bigger happening here. But I think as the time has passed, we've realized like this is a moment to build something new. When the old structures that never worked for us anyway are breaking, how do we radically reimagine what this industry looks like? Like, fuck the laurels, like you were saying, all of these things, like why, you know? And what if we could do that, you know, with this coalition of people that have already been thinking and have already been working towards this, you know, towards this. I think that there's a moment of opportunity truly right now to build something new and suggest something new and have the possibility that it actually can become the new normal. And so I feel like a sense of urgency because of that this is a moment for us to step into. It's a moment of opportunity. But yeah, to all of that. And I had never thought about the educational component. Thank you so much, Rohi, for talking about that. And that was something, you know, we had a conversation with Bowen, and that was something that came up as well when me and Sabaah were talking to him. But yeah, what's the pipeline look like, and what does it, and if we're changing the industry, how does documentary and film education change because of that also? So I think all of that should be on the table and is on the table. And it's been really great to hear like some of these ideas and suggestions. And I think, I mean, basically what we're doing now is just feeling people out. Like, is this something folks are on board with? You know, and what would people want to, you know, tackle and take on? And it's been really good to hear from you guys that, you know, we're in alignment basically.
Just another piece of it is that has been feeling really good in the collective is that, and it's been kind of just happening organically, is, you know, even though there are lots of, organizations of color that exist, like Firelight, ADOC, and, you know, Next Doc, but I still think it's not enough. Like it's not enough at all, you know, to serve the amount of talent that's out there, the number of filmmakers of color, and how can we, I guess, like, how can we all individually and every collective and networks we're a part of continuously think about how do we empower each other and share skills. So like within the collective, you know, someone was like just sharing, did like a workshop on stocks, you know, just like we're really sharing skills and resources in a very aggressive manner how we can. Like Seth and I are offering a masterclass on impact producing this coming weekend. Last weekend, Seth offered a masterclass for the collective members on how to, the best practices of applying for fellowships and grants, you know. So, and like, you know, another purpose for our collective to be decentralized is how do we share, create space for folks to build confidence and be leaders, right? So how can we, we rotate in facilitation, we rotate in all types of responsibilities and like uplift each other's work and voices. So that's just something to like, how can we make this, you know, as big, this community as big as possible? Obviously we all know like stronger, we're stronger together. So so that's just another piece to like always, I feel like, to think about as we're doing this work.
So I feel like a lot has been shared that was super duper powerful. Should we talk about maybe what next steps could look like?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we've been wanting basically to set up these kind of like listening dialogue sessions with folks in the community that we know are doing this kind of equity work, and you guys were on the top of our list. And so we just really wanted to gauge from people if this is something, if this is something of interest, and then also hear about like, what are your concerns and what are things that you're working towards. And so I think the follow-up will be in a few weeks after we've had a few more of these conversations. And what we would like to do is invite folks to join a community board. Maybe even like a community board coalition is a better term for it, because it is a coalition of a lot of existing collectives and groups. And we're trying to get resourced. As Sonya said, we're currently like, we don't want people to be a part of something that is not compensated. We want this to be sustainable. We're also trying at the same time to work out what the structure of this board will look like. So we just ask that you guys give us a little bit of time. I think maybe in the next like 4 to 6 weeks at the most, we'll have a much clearer idea of what this is going to look like. And we will, invite folks to have another conversation, and we'll also keep you updated if anything happens or comes through or changes. We'll keep you guys updated on our process. That makes sense.
And I would also add that from our end, this has been something that we've obviously been working on since January, just outside of the other work that we already have to do. So we are in conversations, early conversations with Ford and MacArthur about resourcing the development of this, just the process of the four of us who are reaching out to you today, getting this all set up so that we can hold the administration and we're not asking people, you know, to have to do a bunch of busy work just to get started and be involved. And then from there, it would be about a secondary effort to find resourcing for the larger board. But I know for myself, this is work that I'm also committed to doing, you know, with or without the support of these foundations. But just because I know we're all kind of talking to the same people, just wanted to let you guys know that we are in conversations with those foundations. And also to find out, and you know, maybe this is something that we can follow up with over email, but I know we've been asked by the foundations in these early talks, who are we talking to? And so would love to, maybe you want to have your group weigh in, but would love to make sure that we have your consent around that, just in case it comes up in future conversations. And obviously we won't speak to any commitments that haven't been made, but just wanted to add that for transparency.
Thank you for that, Sabaah.
Yeah, thank you. And also, you know, to go back to, I remember I said in the panel in Sundance, I don't think it's okay that white people being given funding, public funding and foundation funding, well, foundation, I don't know, but it's not fair that they've been given to keep telling our stories. And when somebody asks me, because they keep saying it's better someone else tells it, I don't believe so. I totally don't believe that. And I believe that they should, like, look, we will tell our own stories on our own way. And if you tell us for us, you are actually damaging us because you are actually portraying what you think of us. And then we believe that. Like you're showing that we start believing, and that's actually damaging rather than helping us. So I think that's really important that those little things, that they're not little details, but they're big details, because then we're going to be able to say, no, these foundations it's not ethical for them to find a white person to tell the story of in my case, Quechua people, I don't know, like Latinos. And I think that's quite important, like these details that we can just grab into and say, no, we're going to hold you accountable to this. We're going to hold you accountable when next time you find a white filmmaker to tell this, we're going to tell you it's not okay. And as a collective of collectives, we can say to you publicly and privately, that's not okay to keep doing that. And I think that's quite, because if not, we're not going to change anything in the end. Because at the end, I love making films, and I'm so creative. I love creating. I'm so political about things, but I'm not a politician. I love making creative work, and I want each filmmaker to have that chance to fail, because the only time that you have the chance to succeed is when you can fail. And if you fail, you're going to succeed. So I think that, you know, because a lot of us are also so busy organizing, because we not just have to make films, you also have to organize. And I'm not complaining about it, but I want the future, the people who are younger than me, the ones who can make films can just make films, and others will like, so we have the right to experiment, to fail, and to succeed. And I don't even know what success is, but in that way, I think that this is what I want us to keep developing visual styles, like styles of like 100 times that we can reimagine and reinvent this world. And I don't want us to keep being backed up. I always feel like in film festivals, I talk about my race and the color of my skin rather than my skill as a filmmaker, except I think Tom Powers in Toronto. And like, I'm there not because of my race and the color of my skin. I'm there because of my talent as a filmmaker. And I'm not complaining about it, but I think that's, we have to put a stop, and we're going to put a stop when they stop making our films. Well, if they are millionaires and they're white, they're still going to do it. But at least they're not going to be supported by the whole industry. And it's going to be some ethical questions from us to them to say, why you keep framing us? Why you keep telling our own stories? You keep constructing us. You construct what we are, how we see each other. That's a construction of what you told us we are. Now we have to deconstruct that. And it's even harder because it's like you end up believing what they tell you. You know, you watch Narcos and you're like, oh God, again. But that's why I end up believing I am. Like, I don't know.
Just to follow up to that, thank you so much for sharing that. I was just like, my neck was hurting from nodding my head. Another thing, like the other day we had a feeling session at Undocu Collective, like just someone had an emotional, like kind of like needed support and just kind of messaged the collective. And we talked about love and relationships, you know, and it was like a 4 to 5 hour long session. And then, you know, we just realized that for the dating life of undocumented people has this layer of things that you have to think about that other people like don't have to think about. You know, there's taboos around undocumented people dating other undocumented people and stuff like that. And so anyways, we then like proposed an idea of doing a podcast of just like undocu love, you know. And that's just bringing that into the space and saying that I think we really need to start producing things in these little collective conversations we're having, because I feel this like this really strong like anger when even like all the rant that we're sharing is like, it feels like we are about to present something to this like grand, you know, gatekeepers that we're trying to prove that we're right, and we're trying to prove that our, you know, whatever, our points are valid. No, like, we're just going to do it ourselves, right? Like, if we imagine, like, if we have 3 different podcasts, one talking about, also, I just wanted to mention, Violeta, that the calling out appropriation has been something like my like strongest passion since I started documentary, and I even did like my graduation presentation on that and stuff. So I've been thinking about creating something around that. So I feel like there needs to be like, other than written things, something that's more accessible for all filmmakers in different mediums, all these conversations. And again, like breaking the barrier for what podcast needs to look like, and not really giving a fuck about pleasing anyone. It's like, maybe we just this is one of the richest conversations that, you know, and we just hit play and produce it and publish it. Like, we don't need to curate it, you know what I mean? Just people hearing. And I feel like when we do panels and stuff, white people listen to us and they kind of are like, yeah, they're just gonna like rant, and like they don't give a shit, they don't get it anyway. So at least whether we get our message across or not, it's gonna be a healing space for us to just release and share, and for like also about the pipeline for young folks to know that folks who are in the field in different positions, emerging filmmakers, established filmmakers, are talking about these things, and just have this like going for them so they can chime into the conversation. So yeah, I'm just really interested, and I feel like we should just have like podcasts and stuff.
No, and, sorry about that. No, and thank you so much for bringing those points up, because like even in the beginning of like when we started doing all of this work, like one of like our first kind of projects was making sure that we're like holding people accountable, like for example with living undocumented and like all the trauma porn that was happening with all of that, right? And I think at the beginning, especially now, like my ideas of like how of inclusion have kind of changed, because in the beginning it was more like, oh, people are not hiring us, like these are our stories, like you should be including us in these stories. But now it's just more like, you know what, screw that, like I'm just gonna make my own, you know, because at the end of the day there's like this really big thing that comes with responsibility when talking about these stories that is just not happening, and a lot of research and just yeah, like again, like with there's no people are not doing these stories responsibly and are not doing justice to these communities, right? So how do we take ourselves from, instead of and also just not allowing that white people are coming into our communities and like taking these stories and only taking stories that will benefit them in the long run, right? And I think that a couple of days ago, like I was having a really a conversation about how do we create these stories so that younger folks can also have these conversations, right? Because I feel like there is a really big lack of just accessibility in these stories. And people just don't have people to mentor them, right? Especially depending on like what community you're part of, right? Like there's a lack of accessibility for whatever reason, right? And by producing these things, I think that it really does create that conversation between our communities that can hopefully in the long run be spread out, you know? And yeah, that's something that kind of.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think like, yeah, you guys are onto something here that like, basically so much of our conversations are informal, like side alley conversations, you know, this has all happened out of the informal conversations. And what does it look like to formalize it? What does it look like to make it like knowledge, you know, and beyond, like every now and then there's an awesome article that comes out. I still reference Sonia's article in Medium anytime I want to have a conversation about empathy, you know, like, but what does it mean to have like a canon, you know, beyond like sporadic, you know, things here and there? What does it mean to have like a canon of this is what our cultural knowledge looks like? This is not, you know, informal conversations or stuff on the side that's happening, but a part of the main thing. As a facilitator, I think it would behoove me to not say that we're 20 minutes over our time. And I just want to be respectful of that. We've got to be transitioning over. So anybody have any final thoughts? I mean, we decided our follow-up will be over email in the next few weeks as things start to come together. We'll keep you guys updated about how it's coming together. Is there any last thoughts, Ami?
Yeah, actually, just real quick, I wanted to share. This just kind of because this kind of just reminds me of like a lot of undocumented folks that would want to go to college, or people from that come from very economically disadvantaged communities that want to go to college, and how these institutions aren't really built, I guess, for people that like come from these backgrounds. And so me being like, because I used to be a mentor for a lot of college students that were undocumented, and something that would always bring up that would always like come into conversation is that, like, you know, we always have to kind of tell a sob story or you know, tell our story so that we would get funding just to go to college or anything like that. And I think something that came into my mind was like how there was this panel in my college that was like, how can we do some ally training or just be an ally to like undocumented folks? And it was more of like how we could, like, you know, us just kind of telling our stories and trying to tell institutional people like we would kind of like put on a showcase, like a shelf, and like, hey, like, you know, we're undocumented and this is like their experiences and how they are doing like these things. But it was a lot of like things where it's like, you know, out of that panel, like a lot of people felt that like, hey, like, you know, like I came to college, or, you know, I pursued higher education not so that I could just tell my story or be like I'm economically disadvantaged or like X, Y, and Z, but because, you know, I wanted to pursue the sciences or pursue the arts or the or whatever field, you know, they were interested in. That conversation came up where it was just like, you know, like we're more than just these labels that kind of come up where we have to, and sometimes people felt like they have to tell, like, you know, they have to tell their stories or tell a sob story or something like that, just so that they can get their way in life, if that makes any sense. And I feel like what the work that we're doing is a step forward to kind of breaking that or unlearning that process or that structure of things that have been not historically, been built for us, I guess, if that's the correct term. Where it's like, they were more, what is it called, inclined for people that were like privileged enough to kind of be in those spaces, and everything.
Yeah, I think also one last point is this idea of competition as well, because unfortunately I think that there's limited opportunities available sometimes for our communities, and just ensuring that ensuring that we're really uplifting each other, and instead of constantly being put in a position where we kind of have to battle against our communities.
Thank you for those last words. That's all love. Sorry, Sabaah,
I'm really glad that we decided to record this, because I feel like out of this conversation, we probably have named like 90% of the major, kind of value questions that are facing all of our communities.
Yes.
This is also an episode of our first episode of our podcast.
Surprise!
I would just posit one thing. I know we're talking a lot about this question about, telling our own stories and appropriation. And I think that as a collective, we should be thinking about, if we're moving white filmmakers out of the director's chair when telling our stories, where are we moving them to? And I think we should be making some recommendations, like bricklaying or farming. Is there work that these white filmmakers could be doing? Construction work, the labor, the trades. Are there trade schools that they could be going to? I just think that we should be thinking about where we're moving these people out of and into what fields really need them. I just want to put that on the table.
Oh,
Right.
I mean, get us coffee when we're in the director's chair,
I think that they can tell. I think that it will be helpful that they tell their own stories and turn the mirror to themselves, because I think that's what they are lucky enough. I mean, they're really happy to look at us, but they don't want to look at themselves. I think that they should. And that's where we have the power, because the moment that we raise as an ethical thing, and also we hold these institutions to power, not to fund these people, we're going to start going somewhere, because then, they're not going to be competing with us to tell our own stories or to tell us who we are. So we are going to do a double thing. We're going to put them aside, but we're also going to put them in the chair of listening, because they need to listen, and they need to listen different ways of expression, because their expression and the way that they frame us is not the only way. And we know that I come from a genocidal background. Like, my people were killed, and now we are alive, and we have the right to tell our own stories and to frame ourselves. And the moment that as a collective we say, no, you can't do this, first, we can hold public institutions accountable, we can hold foundations accountable, and that will grow as a culture accountability, as that, yes, you have the money to do this, but it's not correct for you to do this. So it's just a step by step, like as a cultural thing, that, it's not good to smoke inside. It's the same. It's not good to go and tell someone else's story. Because I remember when you talk to them, they really get angry about it. They're like, well, film is universal. I'm like, okay. Like, I just had an argument with a musician, a white musician, saying, he's like, why you don't want to hire me because I'm white? I'm like, yes. Like, it's not just because I'm white, but film is universal. I'm like, okay, there we go again. Yes, film is universal. But I think that that's why it's universal. You should tell your own stories. You should look at your own people. You have so many problems, and you just focus on us. You focus on us all the time. And we have the power, girls and guys. We do have the power. Maybe sometimes we don't know it, but we do have the power, because once we stop them, they can't look at us anymore. And then we're going to represent ourselves. And we are doing it. Like, I haven't done anything but that in my life. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to have a bit more stamina again, because sometimes it's hard to keep it sane.
Yeah, thank you guys for all of this. It's really amazing. This is like we're, you know, this is what Chiwe says all the time about centering the margins. Like, this is it. This is how we do that. And it's really exciting. This has been such a generative conversation. Thank you guys so much for coming and like sharing and being a part of this. It's awesome. And I'm glad we went 30 minutes over. Sorry for anyone who had other stuff, but it's pandemic times. I feel like you can do shit like that now, you know. But thank you guys very much. And I really hope we have another conversation like this really soon.
Yeah, and please keep the lines of communication open. If you guys, I'm definitely going to be looking for the festival. If there's anything that you come across, readings, anything like that, I'm really excited to continue building with you all, whatever it looks like.
Same, yeah.
Let's do the podcast too. Like, honestly, let's do podcasts. Let's experiment. Let's play. We don't even need to think about has to be amazing or anything. Let's play. Let's have the right to play. Let's do like conversations like this. With let's get it out. Let's not be afraid anymore that has to be perfect. People need to listen to us and need to listen that what the possibilities are there. Let's make it real in a way. It's real anyway. Anyway, I have to go and take my daughter to school.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly share you know, Sonya, the Decolonized Docs Slack that we have, I feel like that group has been wanting to do a very similar thing. Like I have a network gathering at Allied Media Conference and like kind of just sort of like have all these organizations come to Allied Media and have a conference, have a network gathering, kind of figure out how can we all collectively build a coalition. That's what the intention for it. So I wonder if it makes sense for you all to join that Slack and have kind of a common platform for like this interactive generative conversations where we can share resources and stuff. Because I also like, I have a few more sort of like the work that CDS is doing on education piece that I feel like has not been out there, and I have not heard that conversation anywhere. And it might be helpful to also bring them into the conversation, the people, you know, that have been doing. So like what Sonya was talking about, the alternatives, we have actually been like, our white students have been asking us, you know, in classrooms, like, oh, as we were teaching like decolonizing class and stuff, like, so what do we do? So we have been thinking through that and thinking of different ways how you learn to be in solidarity with filmmakers of color. Like even how can you like be a production assistant? How can you like, there are many different ways to support filmmakers of color other than hoarding creative roles, right? So anyways, you all can think about that, and I can like follow up also an email about that.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Ruhi, if you can share this recording with us also, that would be super helpful. We hadn't plotted out who would take notes or anything, so this is really helpful, and we can like summarize a lot of the conversation. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Assia. Thank you guys for your energy, your heart. I appreciate it.
It's been my Monday, I gotta say. It's been a shitty Monday, and I'm feeling like my heart feels good right now. So thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.